Hey guys, let's talk about kidnapping, and specifically, did Richard Allen kidnap Libby and Abby? So first, let's look at the statute. Kidnapping is defined in Indiana's code as a person who knowingly or intentionally removes another person by fraud, enticement, force, or threat of force from one place to another. That's all you have to do is use a threat of force to cause somebody to go from point A to point B. Now, it's no question the victims here were accosted and caused to travel from where they were to somewhere they didn't want to be. That happened. And based on the video they took, somebody apparently displayed a gun, and that was the method they used to coerce these girls. So a kidnapping occurred. The question is, who did it? But wait, why aren't we talking about the murders? Well, everybody knows, of course, Richard Allen has been charged with felony murder, which does not require the state to prove that he murdered these girls. So that's not the question at issue. The question at issue is there enough evidence to show he kidnapped them? So to some degree, the cause of death and things like that are not so much relevant to what his current charge is. It is if there was someone else involved, of course, and they want to arrest them later, but not for this, because the crime here essentially occurs at that bridge. If he's the guy who pulled the gun out and then told the girls to go down the hill, and of course they went down the hill and then were murdered some way, then he's going to be found guilty of felony murder. Because to be found guilty of felony murder when someone dies in the commission of a felony, you have to have a predicate felony, and kidnapping satisfies that. So if he's the guy who did it, he's in serious trouble. What's the evidence against him? There's a gag order now, but before that occurred, the defense team came out and said, hey, look, this probable cause affidavit, it's really weak. They don't have anything on our guy. There's a magic bullet, and he walked on the trail all the time, and he's the one who told the police that he was there. So pretty good comments by the defense there, but they made it sound weaker than it is when you read through it more carefully. To my opinion, it's not the most well-drafted document in the world in terms of explaining a case for guilt, but the purpose of it was simply to get him arrested with probable cause, and it did do that. And of course, we only have a redacted version of it. But there's essentially two classes of information in it that really matter. One, of course, is the quote-unquote magic bullet, which is the unspent .40 caliber round found at the scene. And I'll touch back on it just briefly later. That evidence is going to be challenged by the defense, and rightfully so. And how persuasive it is something we just can't know right now. But also the testimony of other witnesses and Richard Allen himself, and the timeline of his being on the bridge and whether there could have been anyone else there to do the crime. Did he help make it so that the only single person on the planet on the bridge then who was a male could just be him, and therefore it had to be him? That's what we'll look at. So what we're looking here is a map of the whole scene. If you look at the top left, you'll see the High Bridge Trail marker, and that's where it starts at Freedom Bridge, carries on southeast for 0.7 miles until it gets to the actual High Bridge itself, which is apparently about a quarter mile long. Then you see the road just to the north of that above it, which was potentially part of an escape route, but it's also where people park to enter the trail, either back at the Freedom Bridge area, or if you look about halfway down to the bridge, you'll see a little line going up and connecting to that road just to the right of the Harvest Store. That's another area there that people sometimes would enter the trail. In fact, that's where the victims were dropped off, and it's an important entrance as we consider what happened that day. Let's move it forward a little bit, and let's talk about the first set of witnesses who I think matter, and that are the three juveniles. I think it was three girls. And at 12:43, they take a picture at the bridge, and there's nobody there except them. So however long it took them to get down to the bridge, and this walk can take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, unless you're dawdling more, because again, it's only 0.7 miles to get down to the bridge. And if you're walking a normal pace of 3 miles an hour, that's 20 minutes a mile. So it should take, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. They could take longer if you're taking a break or sightseeing or whatever, but that's kind of the situation we're talking about. So whatever time they got there at 12:43, they're taking a picture at the bridge. So we know they were at the bridge, and they had not seen any adult male. Then they turn around and they start heading back, and they are taking their time because at 1:26 in the afternoon, they take a picture of a bench that's near the entrance of the trail. So that gives a mark for the time there. Just after that, they see a single individual male coming down the trail. So this is the first male that they see. So behind them, unless somebody came in on that entrance, there has been no male on this trail. Now there is one. And They give it a little bit of differences in terms of what they see in clothing and stuff, but generally the police say, hey, that's consistent with what the video showed later and also what Richard Allen said he was wearing. The most important point I'm trying to make here is one individual male. Now, we also have the testimony of Richard Allen saying, yes, I saw 3 juvenile girls near the entrance of the trail. So high confidence there that that's them seeing him and him seeing them. And he's going to go east on the trail, heading toward the right, and then they're going to finish their hike and go over there to the Freedom Bridge. So sometime after 1:26, maybe around 1:30 or something like that, he's on the scene, he's on the trail, and that's consistent with what also he had told the police. He said he was there from like 1:30 till sometime after 3 o'clock. So he's on the trail now, and there hadn't been a man on the trail before that. So we got one man that we know of who's on the trail. So I'm putting to the top right here something I'm calling evidence stack, which is kind of the high points of the testimony as we move through this. The first point was the 3 juveniles see only one male on the trail, and that's Richard Allen. By his own testimony, he saw them when they saw him. That's him. Now he goes along this blue box here, the same route the girls just came from. Remember, the girls saw no other male on the trail. Did somebody come onto the trail? Not according to Richard Allen, because he travels all the way to the bridge, he says, and sees no other male on the trail. So the only male he sees on the trail is Richard Allen. So now we've got witnesses consistent with the fact that at least as it currently stands, there's only one man on this trail, and that's Richard Allen. Now we get to what I think is a super critical witness here, super critical, and that is an adult female, and she enters and travels on the trail in what I've got here marked as the red box, because she parks at that halfway point I talked about halfway down the trail. So this is only about 0.35 miles to the bridge. And she gets there about 1:46. And she walks down to the bridge and she sees one male standing out on the platform of the bridge. And then she turns around and comes back, and she leaves at about 2:14 is when she's seen pulling out of the parking lot. So remember, Richard Allen said he traveled down to the bridge. He didn't see any other men. So he's the one man out there. This woman comes at 1:46, which is not too long after he passed by if he was heading straight to the bridge. And she sees one man on the bridge, which is Richard Allen. He said he was on the bridge by himself, and she said he was on the bridge by himself, this one male. So everything is still lining up consistent. And this is getting bad for Richard Allen, because this is getting starting to tighten into when the abduction occurred. Now, you might think, okay, you got the red box there where there are no other men other than the one man who's known to be on the trail, who is self-confessed Richard Allen. But what if he didn't get there by the time she started walking? Couldn't that have been some other guy on the trail? Well, if that's true, he was only to the left side of this blue box where the red box doesn't cover. That's only like a quarter of a mile. And he said he got there and he walked to the bridge. He would have just had to sit there in the middle of the woods at a quarter mile for like, 20 minutes or something like that without moving. And then even if he did do that and finally did move, he didn't encounter this woman on her hike when she was coming back. So no, I don't think so. And he didn't encounter any other male when he did get to the bridge. So I don't think so. Because remember, this woman leaves at 2:14. So until 2:14, the only man she saw was on the bridge. So Richard Allen's going to sit there on this quarter of a mile until 2:14 in the afternoon without moving down the trail at all. That's not what he said he did. Right. And if he had done that and he had gone down to the bridge later and never saw anybody and come back, well, there were people on the bridge around 3 o'clock and 2:30 to 3 o'clock, and they never saw him. So that's not what he said he did. And I don't think there's any evidence it is what he did, because in theory, he came there to go to the bridge. That's what he said he did. And it only takes a few minutes to get there. And remember, of course, the 3 girls had not seen any other male on the trail other than him coming down the trail. And then this adult female comes in a few minutes later and she sees a male dressed consistently, I think, with how he was dressed, standing on the bridge, which is what Richard Allen said he did. Then this woman turns around to leave, and about halfway back, so just under a quarter of a mile away from the bridge, she sees 2 girls heading down to the bridge, and that's the victims. And she continues on up the trail. She never sees another man on this trail. And she leaves at 2:14, which is roughly around the same time the abduction occurs. So she's on the trail almost up until the abduction, about half a mile away from where the abduction occurs. Never sees anybody other than the one male on the trail. And the one male who said he was on the trail, who also saw no other male, was Richard Allen. So the evidence stack now is 3 juveniles see only one male. That's Richard Allen. Richard Allen only sees one male. That's Richard Allen. The adult female only sees one male on the bridge a few minutes after Richard Allen would have arrived if he'd walked at normal speed. And then she sees the victims. She sees no other male on the way back to her vehicle. The victims travel out onto the bridge, right, and across it to the other side. And we know from the video and what the police have released that they saw a male on the bridge heading toward them. And just one male. That's it. The one that's videotaped on the bridge heading toward them. So they also only see one male. And that's the one who kidnaps them and tells them to go down the hill. So how could it be anybody other than Richard Allen? And also hurting Richard Allen's point is that he said he saw the 3 girls who saw him. Then he goes down to the bridge and he never sees anybody else, he says, other than those 3. So he's out on the bridge. He doesn't see this adult female woman who came to near the beginning of the bridge and turned around and walked away. Maybe he really didn't see her. No way to know because they didn't cross paths. She saw him out on the bridge, or a man out on the bridge, and then she turns around and walks back. So he doesn't see these other people, but yet he's out there on this trail. And at 2:13, 2:15 in the afternoon, he doesn't see any other man walking on this bridge. And he claims he doesn't see the 2 victims walking on the bridge, even though we know they walked across the bridge because they took pictures of themselves doing it. So that's terrible. What it looks like is Allen confessed to being out there on the trail. And why would he do that? Potentially because he'd been seen by other people out there on the trail, the 3 girls, nothing more specific than that. So once he fesses up to that, yeah, I saw those girls there and I walked out and I stood out on the bridge. I never saw anyone else, he says. Why? Because he doesn't need to confess to that, because as far as he would know, if he's the guy who did it, the other 2 people who saw him for sure are people who were murdered. So if he's the guy who did it, the confession of being out there that day could be self-serving to demonstrate that he came forward, had nothing to hide when these 3 girls might have identified him, and maybe his car was identified being parked up near the entrance. Now, the defense says, well, he came forward because he's innocent. He just wanted to tell what he knew, which is the same thing everyone else told. The problem is his story was kind of incomplete, right, in terms of who he saw out there and should have seen at the time he was out there. And when you stack it up with these other witnesses, how is it possible that there was someone else out there at that time to do this? Now, maybe somebody sprung out of the woods on the other side of the bridge. If they did that, they would have had to then walk past the girls and out onto the bridge and turn around and come back to them. Why would you do that and give them a chance to run away? I mean, they're at the end of the bridge, just pull the gun out. That doesn't make any sense. You can imagine UFOs and aliens and abandoned twins and all kinds of things like that, but you got to stay in the realm of reality. And his attorneys are going to have to deal with this. Now, I don't think there will be any person saying that was absolutely Richard Allen was the guy I saw out on the trail, because they weren't paying that close of attention to whoever it was. And the person had, hat, hood, whatever, different things on. It was hard to see who it was. But to my mind, that's not so material when Richard Allen is known to be out there, and that as these witnesses sweep back and forth on the trail, he's the only male to be out there. That's it. One didn't get lowered out of a helicopter onto that bridge. That's it. And the only thing I can think of, other than trying to throw up smoke to say, well, they can't identify his face, so they can't say it was him, which I think is a red herring, would be the idea that maybe he was on the left side of this red box when the adult female came in and just waited there until after the abduction came, then raced down to the bridge so he wouldn't see anybody, and then raced off of the trail before anyone else came onto the trail, which also seems highly unlikely and not what he said he did at the time. So that's a pretty good evidence stack of, I think, to show that he was the person on the bridge that day. The defense will have their say on it. They want to be the most effective that they can be. And I think attacking the identity is a good strategy on their part, because I don't think these witnesses are going to be able to identify him. And in some cases, they gave contradictory identification of what kind of clothes were being worn. So that all makes sense. And I think the prosecution is going to have to stick on the timeline. There was one man out there. That one man has a name. There was never any other man out there, and no other point matters, is what they're going to say. So to me, also, when another witness says, well, I saw somebody walking up that Highway 300 heading north, or west and north, that's icing on the cake that there was this muddy / bloody person or whatever. It's kind of icing on the cake because they can't identify him there. Now, it might have been and probably was, if the description is accurate, the person involved in the murders. But whether it's Richard Allen or not, it doesn't really matter, because all that has to be shown here for his conviction is that he kidnapped them. So when he steps off of that little yellow box down there on the bottom right of this picture with a gun, if it is him, and tells them guys down the hill, that's felony murder. It's going to be far enough for felony murder. Whether he was the guy walking up on the road later on or anything else, that's felony murder. So it's not a slam dunk case. And if you think, well, that's not enough, I understand and respect that. If you think it's nothing, you're not paying attention to what the facts are. If you think it's a total slam dunk, I also think that you're missing potentially some weaknesses here. Now, of course, the prosecution says, well, that's not all we have. You know, we have an extremely tight narrative of the timeline that shows he was the person there. He was the only person with the opportunity to do this. And he was affirmatively identified by the one person who could say for sure he was there, which was himself. They also say they found, of course, at the scene, a bullet, an unfired shell casing. Let's look at that. All right. So again, Richard Allen admits to seeing the 3 people on the trail who could identify him, those 3 girls. Then he says he never saw anyone else on the trail. The 2 victims, he didn't see them. This adult woman, he didn't see her. Yet we know those 3 people saw a male on the trail. Now, if there was some other male on the trail other than Allen, that's another person he didn't see. So he just didn't see anybody out here on this trail and this bridge that you're not going to be able to walk over without seeing other people on it if they are on it. That doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound good. All right, let's go back over this bullet thing again. There have been some questions about it. So one question is, could they get a thumbprint from it? And, you know, maybe so, right? Because if you're going to, this is a P226 magazine. If you're going to load it, normally you're going to handle the round like this. So you're going to have your thumb on it and some other finger, and you got to press down on it and slide it back. Sometimes you just do it again with the same thumb. It's a little slick if they get oil on them. Sometimes I'll take the tip of one thumb and kind of get it started, but you do generally have your thumb on here unless you're using a device for it. But even then, you still generally handle the ammunition. So it would be possible, I suppose, to get a print off of it, but they don't say that they did. It doesn't mean that they didn't. I don't know. What they do say, of course, is the extractor marks match his firearm. Now, the idea that they have nothing on him on this round, just like they have nothing on him that he was on the trail that day, it's not nothing. So the idea that an eagle dropped it there, that's no. The eagle didn't pick up a round out of his fire pit, fly it over to the murder scene and drop it between these 2 girls. That's not a higher quality argument than a UFO did it or something like that. Did he happen to be wandering through the woods one day and a previously racked round fall out of his pocket directly onto a spot that would later have 2 murdered bodies, one on one side and one on the other? No. First of all, no. Okay, because it's out in the middle of the woods. There is no walking trail there. But if you insist on saying, well, probably he wandered across this creek or crawled down there someday, and that's where the bullet happened to fall out of his pocket, even though he was the only guy identified on the trail the day of the murder, you have to also start calling him a liar again, because he told the police, I've never been on that property before. I don't know the guy who owns it. I've never been there. So if he's never been there, then the magic bullet, it's much more magical when you try to imagine how it got there other than a gun. It starts to fall apart, okay? Because he wasn't ever there before. And he said, I didn't loan my gun out to anybody. So it's not like someone else could have taken the gun out there and dropped the round on a walk or during the murder. So if it's his bullet, it looks really bad for him. Now, the solid attack on this is, of course, the quality of the match of the extractor marks, and the defense has lit that up, saying that they don't buy it, they don't believe it, they don't think there's science behind it. And that is a solid attack. It's criticized all the time because essentially you're comparing these extraction marks under some kind of magnifying apparatus to other rounds that you put through the firearm. That's usually how you're going to do it. And the decision of whether it's a match or not is not objective. It's subjective by the examiner, who says, yeah, these are similar enough based on criteria I use that I call this a match. And whether that's really solid or not, because it's not objectively solid, it really depends on how good the examiner is, right? Also depends on how distinctive these marks are. So how persuasive this evidence will be depends a lot on those things, and then also on the skill of the defense to rebut it which they will likely get an expert also who will agree with them that this is not a good match. Now, is it going to be allowed in the court? Yeah, likely so. The Indiana Supreme Court has allowed shell casing marks before from unfired rounds. So if you imagine it won't be allowed in court before, I'd like to see the court authority for that, because the Indiana Supreme Court has held otherwise. They don't say, of course, that you have to believe this type of evidence, just that it can be allowed if the trial court decides to do it. So I think the bullet evidence to me is a little bit up in the air, because you don't know the quality of this purported match. If it is high quality and very persuasive, maybe there's something super distinctive about his extractor or whatever. I don't know. If it is high quality, it's not a magic bullet anymore. It's a gigantic problem for the defense. And that's why they try to treat it in a flippant manner, because it sounds so bad if it's true. Oh, it's a magic bullet, but that's not a solid critique of the evidence. The critique that maybe the match is not a quality match because of the procedure used or the examiner, that's good stuff. The flippant, it's a magic bullet thing is kind of over the top, a lot of smoke and not a lot of fire in that one. But I think I look back at the timeline of this, and if you didn't find a bullet there, I'd think, yeah, this guy's looking like the person who did this. Then you add the bullet into it, it gets even worse. So I don't know whether it's going to be enough to convince a jury or not. And of course, we don't know what other evidence they have and will have, and then also what else the defense will pull out. But my point right now is this timeline looks really, really bad for him. And it is all evidence. Whether you like it or not, it's evidence. Is it enough? That's subjective. It's not nothing, and it's not a slam dunk, but it's pretty heavy, people. He put himself there. He's trying to say he was a good Samaritan at this point. Maybe that's true. But no one ever saw anybody out there other than the one man at the time he said he was out there, including himself. So if there's only one guy out there and he says, I'm the guy that was out there, that looks pretty bad, doesn't it? So we'll see what happens as things move further along. Of course, with the gag order, a lot of evidence won't come out anytime soon, but hopefully the guy they have is the right guy for his sake and also the sake of the victims' families too. Thanks, bye.